Hello, I'm Mr. Clark and welcome to GCSE Year 10 Taster Lesson. Today I thought I'd go over joints with you, which is under Chapter 1, Human Anatomy or Anatomy and Applied Physiology. All right, so we're just going to look at the different joints in the body and how they work, the structure, etc. So we're just going to know the different types of joints and the movements we can do in them. And we're going to understand the structure of joints. So we're going to look into how they're actually made up. All right, and then we're going to link the joints and movements to sporting actions. Right, that'll be towards the end. So just as a starter, feel free to pause the video and give yourself some time to answer. List as many bones and muscles as you can. Can you identify the joints they are at? What are the movements that occur? So what do you know already? So feel free to pause, write down as many as you can, and then continue the video when you're ready. So the different types of synovial joint are the ball of socket and the hinge joint. Okay, so the ball and socket joint. At these joints, the limbs or muscles, they can move away from the body and they can move towards the body. And they can rotate round. Okay, so they're freely movable. It's the most movable joint of the body. The hinge joint can only move in one direction. They can just move backwards and forwards, like towards and away from each other. A bit like a door, it can open and close. Right. So if you can think a hinge joint like that, it's really easy to remember. There are 7 different types of movement. These occur at different joints. Flexion and extension, plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. They're specific to a certain type of joint, which we'll go to later in the lesson. Rotation, adduction, and abduction. Okay, so these movements occur at different joints. Okay, so the ball and socket joint. That's the most freely movable joint. All right. For examples being the shoulder, the hip. You can flex, you can extend, you can rotate. And you can abduct and adduct at this joint. Okay. The hinge joint, you can only flex and extend. So you can only close the angle of the joint and open up the angle at the joint. All right. Now let's see if we can put this to the test, see what we know in a minute. Synovial freely movable joints and the structure. They're made up of tendons, bursae, cartilage, synovial fluid, ligaments, synovial membrane, and a joint capsule. All right, so all these things make up the structure at a joint. Now, an example we have in the image here is the knee joint. Okay, so tendons, they're very strong, they're non-elastic. Okay, and they join the muscle to bone. All right, so you can see here, it's joining the muscle here, the quadricep, to the patella. Okay. You also see it joining at the bottom here. The bursae are a sac filled with liquid that floats inside the joint, and this is to reduce friction between the tendon and the bone. All right, so they're just little sacs filled with fluid, so it acts like a bit like a lubricant. Okay. Cartilage is a tough but flexible tissue that acts as a buffer between the bones. So it prevents the bones from rubbing against each other, all right, causing friction. So they're a bit like a shock absorber between your bones. Okay, so you can see them here around the outside at the end of the bones. So they just prevent the bones from rubbing and grinding against each other. Synovial fluid is a clear and slippery liquid that lubricates the joint and stops the bones rubbing together. So a bit like oil in a machine, makes it run nice and smoothly. Okay, so it doesn't grind, helps to reduce that grinding and that friction within the joint. Ligaments, so these are bands of elastic fiber that attach bone to bone. All right, so ligaments, you can see here, it's joining the bones together here. They're elastic and helps that movement, but restricts them from falling out of place. Tendons, you can see, attach bone to muscle, right? which we said before, and they're non-elastic. Synovial membrane, the lining inside the joint capsule that secretes the synovial fluid. Okay, so you can see here, that's the membrane, and it secretes the fluid all around the joint. Okay, so it's all within the knee joint. All right. And then you have a joint capsule, and that's a tissue that stops synovial fluid from escaping and encloses and supports and holds it all together, holds it in place. All right. So you've got the capsule there that just prevents the fluid escaping and going elsewhere. All right. Okay. So again, feel free to pause the video and have a guess. Can we name the joint, and which type of joint is it? All right. So what do we think that is? It is the hip joint. If you guessed correctly, well done. And it is a ball and socket. So you can see here, it's the pelvis, and this bone here is the femur, the biggest bone in your body, right? So it's one half of your hip. It's a ball and socket because you can have loads of different movements at the joint. This next one, again, feel free to pause and continue when you think you've guessed it. What do we think it is? What type of joint is at this? Let's have a look. It's the shoulder, and it is, again, it's a ball and socket. So you can see here, this is the humerus, so that's your upper arm. And you've got your shoulder along here. You can see your scapula, which is the flat bone at the back. It is a ball and socket joint, and lots of movement at the joint. You can abduct, you can adduct, flex, extend, rotate, etc. Okay, that's why it's a ball and socket joint. And here are the examples that we got for our ball and socket. At the hip, we can flex when we lift our whole leg up. We're flexing, so we're closing the angle at the joint, and extending, going back down, straightening the leg. You can see the angle is getting bigger, therefore it's extension. Abduction, so abducting the leg, you're moving it away from the body, hence the word abduct, yeah, moving away. And then adduct, as if you're moving it adding it to the body. Adduction, you're closing it in towards the body, so back into the midline of the body. Okay, so abduction, moving away, adduction, moving in. And it's the same for the shoulder over here. Flexion, you can see this bird's eye view of the person here. Flexion, you're closing the angle of the joint, so moving the arm forward. You can see the angles being closed in here. And extension, moving the arm back. You're making the angle bigger, right? Extending at the shoulder, right? Again, you can abduct and adduct at the shoulder. Abduction, raising the arm, so abducting and moving the arm away from the body. Adduction, moving it back in, right? Adding it to the midline of your body. So adding in, abducting, away, right? The ways to remember that. And then you can see rotation here. You can rotate and twist the arm at the shoulder. That's called rotation. Yeah, so you're rotating your arm at the shoulder. So moving on, what joint is this, and what type of joint is it? I'll let you pause it, have a guess. What do we think it is? It's the knee, and it is a hinge joint. So here you can see the patella at the front, the femur at the top here, and then you've got your tibia and your fibula, two bones. It might have been the giveaway, or the patella might have been the giveaway for the joint there, and it's a hinge because you can only do two movements. See if you know what they are. Flexion and extension. Right, two movements at a hinge joint. Open, close, flex and extend. So what do we think this one is? Again, feel free to pause, name the joint, and what type of joint is it? It's the elbow. You can see the humerus, big bone at the top, your upper arm, and you've got your radius and ulnar making up your lower arm. Again, it's a hinge joint because you can only flex and extend. All right. So here's our movements in action at the joints, at the knee and at the elbow. You can see the elbow here, flexion. You're closing that angle in, so you're making the angle smaller from the lower arm and the upper arm. yeah, which is called flexion, and extension, making that angle bigger, so straightening it out, is yeah, you've got your extension there. Works exactly the same at the knee, flexion, where you're bending your leg, making that angle smaller at the knee, and then raising it back up again, so you're straightening your leg. It's called extension. So you're making that angle almost at like a 180 degrees, making it nice and straight, extending at the knee. You can see the upper, the thigh isn't moving, as well as the upper arm not moving. The angle is just closing at the knee and opening, and same at the elbow, opening and closing. Right, that's where the movement's taking place. So if you can remember back where we're looking at the types of movement, there are two types of movement there which we haven't covered yet, and they're specific to this joint. So it should be, name the joint. Which type of joint is it? I think it should be a bit of a giveaway there, but feel free to pause, guess, and think if we remember the two types of joint movement, which we haven't looked at so far. So we have the ankle, so your tibia and fibula up here, talus, which is right in the middle of the ankle there. It is a type of hinge joint because you can only flex and extend at the ankle, but they have specific names. Okay, and that is dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. All right, so dorsiflexion is when your feet are toes are pointed or feet are pointed. Dorsiflexion is when you raise or flex the ankle up as if you were to put your foot in front of a door. Okay, and then there's a good way of remembering that movement there, dorsiflexion, as if you're putting your foot up against the door, so you're flexing, making that angle smaller at the ankle. Okay, then the opposite, plantar flexion, pointing your toes, as if you would when you're bouncing on a trampoline. When you jump up and you point your toes down towards the ground, that is plantar flexion. And you can see the word plantar flexion. The way you can remember that is if you were to put your foot down on a plant or some soil, as if to dig the soil down, and as if you were planting a flower into the ground, you'd push down that soil with your toes, right? So you can see here you're extending the angle at the joint, at the ankle, and that is plantar flexion, right? So although it kind of looks like you're extending your foot, it's still called plantar flexion. Okay, now let's see if we can give these a go. You can pause here, have a look at this grid, and see if you can see if you can cement that knowledge and guess some of the movements and muscles and bones in this grid. Okay, so pause, give yourself 5 minutes and get as many as you can. Okay, give it a go. Okay, in the next slide, I'm not going to go through absolutely everything. We'll just cover some of the pictures on the grid and look at the types of movement. So in 1E, well, to begin with, here are the answers. But in 1E, we have the basketballer. It was asking you what the elbow, the type of movement at the elbow, what was it currently doing? And with the arm outstretched and elongated, it's in extension. Yes, which is both arms. The arm is up nice and straight. Both arms are fully extended. Okay, so that's extension at the elbow. In 2F, we have the darts player getting ready to throw a dart, and it asks what the elbow is doing here, and it's in flexion. So the angle is closed in at the elbow, so it's currently flexed. And as he'd throw the dart forward, he's extending his arm to throw it. Okay. In 3B, he's asking what the footballer here, Mr. Harry Kane, what movement is happening at the knee. And as you can see, as he struck the ball, his leg is straight, it's fully extended, so it's extension. Okay, so it's in that extended position. Bit of a tricky one here. 4A, it asked where the ankle, and although it's not easy to see, the ankle here, you can see the toes are pointing downwards, and that is in plantar flexion. So remember we said the toes pointing down as if it's pushing soil into the ground, trying to plant a flower. That's in plantar flexion. Another tricky one, it asks the movement at the hip and the shoulders. You can see in this almost doing the splits position and the arms raised away from the body. That was abduction because the limbs are away from the body. If they're closed in the midline back in, that would be adduction. And then here in 4E, it asked again another tricky one. It asked the movement at the shoulder. So remember that overhead shot we had a few slides ago, flexion at the shoulder, making the angle closed. Yeah, that was flexion. So if the arm was behind or further back, that would be extension. Okay, so here in front where this player is bowling or throwing the ball, there is flexion at the shoulder. Okay, so we have different. We've gone through the different synovial joints of the body. We've looked at the structure, looked at the makeup of them, and we've also linked. If we go back, we've linked some sporting actions to the movements and the joints involved. Okay, so there's just a brief intro into synovial joints, into a few bones and some movements. I hope you learned something. Goodbye.